Welcome to Hell of a Picture, a weekly movie podcast where we discuss an unforgettable film. And if it truly is a hell of a picture, my name is Andrew Bartlett, and I'm sitting across the internet, as I do each and every week, from the Kobe Bryant to my Shaquille O'Neal, Mr. David Hollinshurst.
Whoa, maybe the most flattering analogy to date. I can't really think of higher praise, quite honestly. Big Aristotle and the Black Mamba. Damn. Wow. Thank you. I'm truly humbled.
Yeah, I feel like that was sort of a representation of our when we played basketball. I was the dominant post. You were on the wing and you were getting me the ball, and I was this lunatic, and you had the finesse game. And
yeah,
we loved the Lakers.
Kazam and assorted other terrible films. You made Kazam, didn't you?
Blue Chips, man. Blue Chips.
Oh, wow.
Shaq made Blue Chips.
Was a good one. He did, but he also made Kazam.
Blue Chips
Let's
are
not
great.
Forget.
He did. So this week we're getting into the 2002 film Hero, which I'm excited to talk about. I'd never seen before. But before we get into that discussion, I want to open up this week and just ask, if you've watched anything this week, anything new or anything you rewatched, give our audience a little bit of a taste into not just the films we're talking about on the podcast, but what else are you getting into?
Oh man, this week watched the the absolute horror classic. You'll be delighted to know, another dip into
horror.
The horror
Okay,
pool.
I love it.
Yeah, I Know What You Did Last Summer. The absolute. I mean, you got Freddie Prinze, you got Sarah Michelle Gellar, Ryan Phillippe, Jennifer Love Hewitt, a who's who of teen idols of the era.
Oh,
and man, what a delightful piece of crap that was. Just a joy.
I was always I Know What You Did Last Summer stan over Scream. Like I like the.
Oh really?
I like the I Know What You Did Last Summer. They were sort of in the same vein. Obviously, It's like, and then there was like, I Still Know What You Did Last Summer. It's these are so.
And I think even a third one, I'll Never Forget What You Did Last Summer. Though at that point they had lost. Jennifer Love Hewitt had bowed out, so for me,
right.
The franchise was over.
It was over. Yeah, for me this week, I watched a couple things. Started in on season 3 of Ted Lasso. Myself and my wife Sarah had loved the first 2 seasons and just kind of never got around to the third. It's not hitting home for me. I really liked the first 2 seasons, and it's just not. I don't know. We're like probably 6 or 7 episodes in. There's good moments, and I love certain characters, but it's just sort of like it's not hitting the way the first 2 seasons were. And then also, in preparation for next week's podcast where we're doing Rocky 4, I'm going to rewatch all the Rockies. So I got through Rocky 1, the first Rocky, and man, that is such a good movie. And it's so wild that in the same year that Taxi Driver and Network came out, that somehow Rocky won Best Picture. It blows my mind to this day.
America loves an underdog story, I guess.
Whew, do they ever, man? Do they ever? Yeah. It's just wild. It's so well written. It's so well acted. We've advanced obviously in the but yeah, it's still, I think it's a great movie, and I like Rocky, and it's a funny how that just people like fell in love with it, and that's how people can fall in love with these certain movies sometimes. It's interesting.
Well, it certainly gives credence to the idea, like you mentioned, you had heard someone suggesting a retroactive Oscars 5 years after the fact to see if opinions have changed.
Yeah.
So it'd be interesting to see
Love
a revisiting of was it 19... What year was that?
78?
Was it that late? I was thinking it was earlier 70s. But anyway, yeah, if they were to revisit a few years later, because I think Taxi Driver was not super well received and by a lot of quarters,
76
in its time. Yeah, like I think Taxi Driver was booed at Cannes, actually. The response was, pretty rancorous, actually. So, Yeah, with time to consider, I wonder if that would have taken the Oscar. And of course, Network is held up there as an all time great.
Oh
So
yeah.
I'm really surprised to hear that was in the same year and didn't win. A film I've never seen though, only heard about. So maybe something we can discuss.
Ooh, we
down
should
the road.
do that. We should
Yeah,
definitely discuss that, because that
yeah,
is
I'd be super into that.
that's a movie I've only seen kind of like a couple of times, but the performances in them are. That was Network was a big influence of one of my favorite modern directors, Paul Thomas Anderson, who
I thought you were going to say
I have a
PTA
lot
there.
of,
Yeah.
yeah. So he he loved Network, as a lot of people do and did and do. But we're not talking about Network today, but we're talking about Hero, one of your dare I say favorite movies.
You may, yeah, you may dare, because this is something I've long held up. It's interesting though; like it's definitely something I've kept on a short list of movies in my mind. But it's been, I would say, it was close to a decade since the last time I had seen this. Like I had watched it a ton, in another time and place, and then I'd gone a long time without seeing it. I think largely due to availability.
Right.
Like it just wasn't around, and I didn't have a hard copy.
Dude,
It's not something you see on streaming services a lot. I had to go out and buy this digital copy. And it was really cool to watch it again and watch it twice. Interestingly, so like I said, it had been a while. I watched it once and then did some writing for the show, watched it again last night, and I thought the screening last night was even better. So
wow.
it was the kind of thing, even though I've seen it a bunch, it benefited from a second watch this time around. And so, yeah, very, very interested in talking about this today with you.
Hero is a movie that I had never seen before this podcast, and I was very familiar with, from friends of ours and my brother and people talking about it over the years. And I had never seen it, but I always kind of was new. I was like, oh, I kind of know what this is, and I'm sort of familiar with the genre. Like it's one of those movies you think you know until you kind of watch it, and you're like, oh, this is a bit different than what I thought this film was, right? I remember a good friend of mine had never seen Star Wars, and he's a huge movie guy, and like throughout his whole life he got to his like 20s and just had like never seen Star Wars and was just like not really interested in the genre, so it kind of made sense. But at the same time, it's like, man, how do you never watch A New Hope? Like that movie is
good God,
flawless. It's like so good. He's like, yeah, like Darth Vader, like I'm your father, like I know everything. It's like, well, that actually doesn't take place.
That about sums it up. There you go.
Yeah. Anyways, he finally got around to watching it, and he's just like wrote me right away and was like, holy shit, that is so good. Like, you know what I mean? Like, what the fuck was I missing?
Yes, this is what people have been talking about.
That's right.
What did you?
This happens so often with films. You know, you watch a movie or you hear about a movie and you kind of think you know it. You think you know the genre or think you know what you're getting into. And then, sure enough, it surprises you a lot of times. And that's what happened with Hero to me. And we'll get into that, obviously. When I first started it, I was sort of like, it didn't sell me on it until about halfway through. And I was like very invested.
Okay.
But this is an interesting movie because it didn't, like you said, I, for one, as you can see, that's like just a little bit of my collection, but I like getting all the physical copies of all the movies we do. Like I like going out and just like grabbing them, but like you can't find physical copies of anything anymore. And I was like scouring to try to find Hero on Blu-ray. Couldn't find it on Blu-ray. Couldn't find it on DVD. Like you said, I had to kind of rent it on a streaming service. So it's a tough one to track down. It has been on streaming services before, but long live physical media. Once you buy this, you own it. And,
Word.
But anyway, let's get into where we start our discussion every week with your wonderful rundown. A rundown I think will be very beneficial in this movie, as it did come out almost 25 years ago, over 20 years ago now, which is wild to think about.
Yeah, still seems so recent, but the rundown. During the Warring States period of 227 to 221 BCE, ancient China was not unlike George R.R. Martin's Westeros, a land of 7 kingdoms that would be one. The king of Qin endeavors to unite the land through conquest, and in doing so has made himself the target of the greatest assassins from all the disparate kingdoms. When our story begins, it would seem that deliverance is at hand for His Majesty, as a simple prefect from his own country has purportedly bested the three most deadly foes of Qin, those being Long Sky, Flying Snow, and Broken Sword. This prefect, known only as Nameless, arrives at the palace to receive his reward and relate for the king the details of his triumph. Nameless weaves a tale of peerless combat, honor, and betrayal. But after the Nameless hero recalls his story, the king is unconvinced, and we hear two more versions of the events. One from the king, and then a final unedited version from Nameless, where we learn the whole truth of the plot to assassinate the king and where the loyalties of Nameless truly lie. Hero was directed by Zhang Yimou and first released in China in 2002. It was written by Zhang Yimou, Bin Wang, and Fang Li, and it stars Jet Li as Nameless, Tony Leung as Broken Sword, Maggie Cheung as Flying Snow, Chen Daoming as the King of Qin, Ip Man himself, Donnie Yen as Long Sky, and your girl Zhang Ziyi as Moon. Hero cost about $30 million to make, and it took in about $177 million worldwide. At the 2004 Oscars, you'll notice 2 years after its initial release, the film was nominated for Best Foreign Language Film, losing out sadly to Nowhere in Africa, a German film directed by Caroline Link about a Jewish family who relocate to Kenya during the Nazi rise to power. Hero was similarly nominated at the Golden Globes and similarly lost. The film did receive its due, however, at the Hong Kong Film Awards, being nominated 14 times and taking home 7 of those, including cinematography, art direction, action choreography, an award which I think we should probably be giving out at all award ceremonies, sound and visual effects, original score, and costume design. The New York Film Critics Circle also saw fit to honor the film, awarding Best Cinematographer to Christopher Doyle for his work on Hero. And if the name Christopher Doyle seems out of place here, he also goes by the name Du Ho Feng, and he is an Australian-Hong Kong dual citizen who has worked on over 50 Chinese language films in his career. And based on what we see in Hero, I wouldn't mind seeing more of his work. When you look into this movie and see what people have said about it over the years, some variation of the phrase visually stunning comes up over and over again, and for good reason. This movie is a visual splendor, and for me, with regards to cinematography and fight choreography, particularly the first fight, I'm not sure I've seen anything surpass it, even to this day. And that is your rundown.
Nice. Well said. We had mentioned this last week, and this sort of westernizing of the martial arts genre, and you sort of think about, I do anyway, sort of 3 films that encapsulate this era, and it's Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, which came out a couple of years before this, Hero, and then House of Thousand Flying Daggers.
Flying Daggers, yeah, flying.
Yes, yeah. So, yeah, it really kind of took over the culture and was in the cultural zeitgeist for a kind of the turn of the century there. And this, like you said, sort of driving that narrative. And so yeah, let's get into this movie as you're kind of talking. This film is a Chinese film, made, in China. And, with that comes certain, I guess, motifs or certain ideas, that come along with that, a lot of the time. Most notably is this film is visually stunning, as you said, but also has a lot of, I would think, Chinese propaganda. And that's something that I'm not too versed on, but as you're sort of watching this film, you're thinking, is there a deeper message being portrayed besides just this visually stunning cinema and story and unique way of telling this story? Is there something else at play?
Yeah, I mean, this movie sweeps you up and wraps you right away in emotional and
Yeah.
sensory stimuli. It's we said it's beautiful to look at, it's beautiful to listen to, it's melodramatic in a
Mm,
Shakespearean way, and all of that makes it very easy to realize that it is a piece of propaganda. It's really, when you get right down
yeah.
to it, it's truly the perfect Machiavellian parable. Yeah, at its core.
Yeah, it's takes this it takes this position of sort of the ends justify the means, you know. And
Yes.
when we're presented with Chin, um, you know, he's attempting to unify all these like these six kingdoms into one, and like with that, it's not like, oh yeah, let's just unite everybody and it's all going to be fine and we're all going to, you know,
Yeah.
ride off in the sunset together and be under one nation. It's like, no, it's like people didn't want to do this. It's like like with any sort of kingdom that overthrows and conquers lands, there's like slaughter and mass slaughter. And you sort of, you know, that's sort of introduced off the hop, but he's not,
Hmm.
you know, but how he's presented, and this is what makes the story very interesting, is like he's sort of presented as this like, you know, horrible ruler off the top, this, but like then it sort of, it changes. His intentions are noble, and he's trying to make peace, but he's doing it by making war. And you know, that's sort of his justification. And we sort, but the unique way is, of course, we're seeing it from both sides, and we're seeing him as a sort of a peaceful ruler, but then also a bloody tyrant.
Yeah, he's framed, not as a monster, but as someone who's kind of enigmatic. And the first thing we
Mm,
see in this film is that classic introductory text. It's the white font on the black background, and it says, "People
classic.
give up their lives for many reasons: for friendship, for love, for an idea, and people kill for the same reasons." So right away,
Love
we're
that.
being told that some people die for a good cause because some people have to kill for a good cause, and so there is kind of this justification for tyranny and conquest. And it does bear mentioning that some of the things that the actual King of Qin did were important building blocks of civilization. He
Mm,
did contribute to things like the standardization of coinage, written language, and
right.
let's not forget the Great Wall, one of the human-made wonders of the world and all-time great boondoggles. And this all came at the cost of millions of lives.
Yeah, there's a strong sense of like, I guess, of sacrifice as being like the most noble thing that a person, you know, a citizen, sort of a no-name person, can aspire to do. And that's what's so funny, naming this character Nameless. It's
Yeah.
like, what citizens, what a regular kind of everyday Joe, or kind of like a person should aspire to, is they want to become a hero. And that's like the only way you can kind of become a hero is to make the ultimate sacrifice for the greater good, sort of thing. The Nameless
Mm.
hero is this perfect representation, of a kind of a role model for a repressive government, to like, and how it holds up to its people. And yeah, it's just so funny that this character's name is Nameless, and it's like it could have been anybody that willing to make this sacrifice to become a hero, right? And along with that, there's few other characters in the film. They all have to make sacrifices for the greater good
Hmm.
at some point, and you sort of see it as this story is revealed through the unique way of telling the stories, from different points of view. And then it's like, first it's the Nameless telling it, and then the Emperor telling it, then you know Broken Sword, and then what I mean. It's like everybody's kind of telling these different perspectives and shifting it,
Hmm.
but all for this kind of like idea of sacrifice, for the greater good, or in this case for the king, I guess, which is
Yeah.
just like,
Yeah, that's right.
you know
Well, that's right, and that is like unfortunately what a lot of these things ultimately come down to. They do sound
yeah.
virtuous and very righteous, but really what unfortunately what they wind up being is for the aggrandizement of a despot or a ruling class, and then these people who sacrifice themselves are really just doing it not for the noble intentions they think they're doing it for, but for something a little more venal. And this movie just does an exquisite job of conflating emotion and color and sound and action with those virtues of sacrifice and honor into this one sort of demagogic kind of stew. And it is a piece of propaganda. It's manipulative and it is insidious, but it's undeniably beautiful. And I think I can disdain the former while still adoring the latter.
That's a really interesting thing, like being able to sort of distinguish these things and still, the message being something that may not be very good, but then also understanding seeing the beauty in how these things are presented. Right. I also like the idea that there's really there's 6 characters in this movie. Like that's it, but like there are seems to be thousands of extras, and it's like as I'm watching, I'm looking like, look at all these, like they're kind of like faceless, nameless, like just like the soldiers in the army, and then sort of like all these kind of like, I just found that to be kind of engrossing, that it was like, look at all these people and they're all kind of fighting for this greater good, but it's really for the emperor, right? And it's really for his greater good. The film was like, and so again, this idea is, I don't want to say it's prevalent in Chinese cinema, but it's like, it obviously kind of reflects a lot of ideas coming out of China, and like a lot of their ideas with respect to government and the Chinese history, and excuse me. So that's why, it, on the surface, it seems like it wouldn't work in America, or it wouldn't kind of like translate to American cinema. But the really interesting thing was, like, you said it in the rundown, like this was bought by Miramax, and then 2 years later, it was bought in 2002 after it was sort of released in China and sort of had this initial wave. And this just goes to show how good the filmmaking is, because even it has a story like that, it's still like, it just did numbers in America when it was finally released. And like you said, it was the most expensive and one of the highest grossing foreign films in North American box office history. Like, to this day, it's crazy. I was looking at the top 10 highest grossing foreign language films, and I was like, oh, it has to be like Parasite, and it has to be like, I don't know, like Crouching Tiger. And sure enough, Crouching Tiger is number 1. But then it's like Life is Beautiful, Godzilla -1, which is an incredible film. But then it's Hero. Like, Hero is still on the list of the top 10, which is like pretty, I don't want to say surprising, but it's still, it took in 53 million when it finally was released.
Yeah, and it was number 1 at the American box office for a couple of weeks. Yeah, after a tremendous run in Asia. And I think it's still the only foreign language film to top the box office, the American box office, that is, and it stayed there for 2 whole weeks, which I still think, I'm not sure if anyone has bested that. And yeah, like you said, like it was acquired by Miramax, the American distribution rights, and they delayed it for like 2 years, and we're going to continue to delay until our boy Quentin Tarantino convinced them to open it in August of 2004. And he was a really great champion of this film. And even if you look at the American poster, it says Quentin Tarantino presents Hero.
That's great. That's really interesting that he had this sort of, he obviously had the sense and thought that it's like, use my name, slap my name on it. He's like, I want people to watch this movie because it's so good. Now, obviously, I'm sure they probably paid him for something like that, or maybe they didn't. I don't know. But like, he obviously was a huge champion of this film, that he was willing to put his name on it just to get people to be like, okay, well, if Tarantino loves this movie, then surely I should at least watch it and get, form my own opinion.
Yeah, that's why I was so surprised to hear that you hadn't watched it because of that endorsement. I figure
Hmm.
you would have been running out to see it. But interestingly, like the movie didn't make it to the West entirely unaltered. There was one key point that they do change, and that being
Right.
a very important phrase in the film, and they altered the translation for it. And I'll apologize now for what I know will be a mispronunciation, but the phrase is "tianxia." And this comes up multiple times in the movie. It's extremely important, extremely important. Atensia, I believe, is how it's pronounced.
Yeah, and so that's correct me if I'm wrong. Those were the two words that that bro Nameless says to the king, right? That
Yes,
broken
that broken
sword,
sword said to
right?
him, "Yeah,
Right. And he's like, and it translates in the film in the English subtitles. It translates to our land, which
yes,
which is not a direct translation, right? It's like it's like yeah, it's not. I think the from sort of the research I've read, it was a more accurate translation to like all under heaven, right? Implying sort of the whole
yes,
world
correct."
versus like our land being. So that's very interesting, right? Because that's sort of a obviously a very um, deliberate choice, right?
Yeah, and I guess Miramax or whoever sort of thought that that implication of the whole world might be a little threatening. Um,
Mm.
and so they chose to confine it to something that would be implying China exclusively, and that would be okay. That would people would find that more palatable. But if the suggestion was that it was the whole world, they yeah, that might sort of be a little intimidating to hey, the balloons are back again. Wow, it's been a
You
long
got
time
the
since we've seen
balloons.
those. Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that was an interesting tweak, and because of how important and how central that phrase is to the film and its structure.
Well, it's vital to it, right? Obviously, the whole kind of the narrative relies on that. Um,
Hmm.
the director said, he said, "quote like if you ask me if our land is a good translation, I can't tell you. All translations are handicapped. Every word has different meanings in different cultures, which is sort of a great idea."
Hmm.
I also read that this movie sort of came out right around 9/11. So they
Yes.
thought that they would want this to sort of promote peace, um, but also it's a divisive time and it was tough around then. So it's like the thought is sort of like, okay, can this, not that a movie has to do this, but like it's a difficult time for people to get behind this idea of you know all under heaven or peace under heaven, or I mean, like I don't know. It's just it was just a different time in American society that sort of made it a bit more difficult to get across the message.
I mean, in a way, it might have made it easier, actually, because I think patriotism was really at a fervor at that time. If you think about post 9/11
Right,
America,
right,
there
right, right,
was
right,
this
right.
great
Yes.
sense of sort of, patriotism that bordered on nationalism, which we see continuing to today. So, selling an idea like this of self sacrifice for, one's government or one's
Right.
country, it might have been it might have been just the right time for it. Interestingly enough, but we've talked, mentioned a bunch of times how visually arresting the film is, and how it
Mm.
it almost overwhelms you with sight and sound and balletic combat. And the use of color is really important in this movie. And it's not just an aesthetic choice, because we see different colors dominate the tableau of this film at different points throughout, with
Yeah.
with each of those points being distinct in that they are retelling the same story, and each version is shedding a little more light and getting us a little closer to the truth.
Yeah. The colors that obviously very much stuck out to me as I was watching it for the first time. I was like, oh, okay, so now we're, because the color when Nameless is sort of first coming to the palace, and he sort of, it's like this drab, like dark colors, dark blue, like really like grays, and then then you're getting into these, he's telling these stories, and then it's like these whimsical colors, just reds and blues and like what, and it's like, it's and the environments that they take place in, they're very like you said, they're whimsical and they're like beautiful, and you're like, okay. And an interesting part was I was reading too that the initial plan for the director was he wanted to have all the like the different stories, like essentially the points that there's different colors that are kind of like taking over. Like this is the first story he's telling when he's fighting Long Sky and all that. He actually wanted a different cinematographer for each part of the story.
Yeah, I saw that.
So that was like, I was like, man, I don't know if I've ever heard of that before. I've heard of like different directors taking over in different parts of movies, obviously different actors playing the same role in different parts of films, but like a different cinematographer. And I think it just wouldn't work. But, it's the idea of story and like how these kind of elements in cinema, like specifically the color, like as we were mentioned, that's a device to get across this story that's told to us. That's like a similar, people compare this to Rashomon, which we sort of mentioned last week when we first started talking about this movie, where it's kind of, it's just a great piece of cinema that, is told from different perspectives. And it's like, how do you get across that there's different perspectives at play? And it's like, well, let's use different colors, right? And the colors are representatives of certain things. I know. Yeah. So like, I think that's just a really great choice by the filmmakers to just kind of be like, okay, this is like, these are going to evoke these emotions in this kind of point of the story. And I don't think that necessarily red or green or white or like any of them were like necessarily representative of how we interpret those colors, like culturally. Like I think you can pull that, like red in the film, red is like love, or could be anger, but it's also like in this film you can look at it and you can say it's passion, or it's jealousy, or it's vengeful sort of thing. It's I think it's up to our interpretation.
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, it's twofold, right? Because it does serve to delineate the narrator, like, so that this is a different version of events because we see the transition in color. So it serves as an excellent device that way, and it can also be symbolic. And I think it is what we tend to associate with these colors is kind of represented by the actions of the characters in these versions of the story. So in that first one, there is this lover's tryst between Broken Sword, Flying Snow, Long Sky, and Moon, and everyone's very catty and spiteful, and they're having revenge sex and all this stuff. And then we get a second story. After Nameless tells this story, the king perceives that it is not the whole truth, and so we get a second version where the roles are reversed, and now the king is telling Nameless what he thinks really happened. And so now we see a different narrator, and we get a different color and a different tone, I would say, too.
Yeah, it kind of keeps switching up, and it just evolves. But like, as I was mentioning too, it's like the idea that the version of that would be is blue, right?
The king's story is blue.
The king, and everyone is like, it's just like more measured and more like it's always kind of getting closer to that truth, to that ultimate truth, right? And still it's motivated by virtuous concepts, but more orderly in their devotion to them, I think. And that sort of brings us to what the next part is. Then is it white? I can't.
Yeah, that's right. Yep. Yeah, it goes from red to blue to white. Yeah,
and but again, like I want to mention the environments that they all take place in, right? It's like that the first one is, they're in the they in the it's like they're in the desert, and then they're in the forest, I think, and then they're on the lake, right? I
Yeah.
think those are how they're all equated.
Yeah, that's right. There's a different environment that sort of corresponds to the color and to the
Mm-hmm.
mood. And yeah, in that second one, we do see blue become the dominant color. And in that too, we also see that the king is beginning to unravel a bit of stuff too. And this is where the movie takes an interesting turn I think, you mentioned you didn't really entirely see coming. That, Nameless is one of the assassins, and he's been chosen among
Right.
them to kill the king. And so this first story was entirely deceitful. And so yeah, we get the king's telling of it, but what we have there is still not the whole truth. And the last version we get is sort of the unabridged version, and it's in white, and we get an unaltered account. And white is
Yeah.
kind of, I guess, this sort of uniting of the two things, the blue and the red, like sort of the primary colors coming together. And so we find out what the truth of the plan is, which is that Nameless was there to kill the king, but
Right.
he's been dissuaded, or potentially dissuaded, by Broken Sword, who tells him that, he makes this appeal to him for to not kill the king in the interest of unity, in the interest of one nation and an end to war, and an end to war through submission, basically peace through conquest. And another way you could consider this whole sort of like, this division of the colors, is the idea that red could be the people, sort of the subjects of the crown. And
Okay.
blue could be representative of the crown itself, the ruling class. And then the union of the two is white. And that's sort of the ideal society where everyone is in their place. You have the ruling class and you have the people, and it's orderly and it's virtuous, and you have reason and you have passion, all sort of coming together to create an ordered and, in quotes, perfect society, as one person would see it.
Yeah. I think that's a great reading of the colors and the use of the colors. And I did, and especially with relation to sort of the environments that the colors are part of, with like everything from, like I mentioned, the lake and the desert and the tea house, and it's like all these places and environments you can create like such unique cinematography and just scenes from these settings alone. And then when you kind of incorporate the colors, and then the fight scenes, which I think we should kind of
Hmm.
dive into, because like these whimsical, like beautifully choreographed fight scenes, I mean, sometimes they're playing out as they were in this kind of story that Nameless is telling, or the Emperor is telling. But then also, like, I was sort of blown away by even the moment that Nameless is they're playing the fight scene out in their heads, and
Mm.
it's like it's like a chess match or like whatever, and they're just sort of like, oh, it's to the point now where you don't even have to actually fight. You know everything, so let's just kind of like play it out in our heads. And that's what they're sort of doing in that sort of like one of the dream sequences anyway.
Yeah, that first scene in the tea house where Sky and Nameless duel is so beautiful. You've got the music being played in the background.
Yeah.
The rain is sort of dripping down very slowly. It's a very sort of placid kind of surrounding. And if I have one critique of this film, it might be that the best fight in the movie is the first one. And from there, it's like I don't think it ever
Yeah.
fully reaches that same plateau. And yeah, and the setting and color and the version of events all sort of dictate the style of the fight too. And that first scene, there's chess and
Right.
music, and it's all very civilized. It's in black and white, and yeah, and then from there you see fights
It's
take
like
on sort of different attitudes based on their
right.
environment.
Yeah, like the red version is like frenetic and like sort of like all over the place, and there's like the arrows are getting like kind of like slattered in, and like it's just sort of like
Yeah,
all this like that scene between Snow and Moon where they fight in the grove of trees, and like leaves are, it's like holy, like it's really, like you said, it's like breathtaking, like how they created it. And yeah, there's just this like how they, yeah, like just like how they, the art of choreographing that. And like you mentioned this in the rundown, where it's like in the Hong Kong awards, it won like, best kind of fight choreography. And like that, this is just like a sidebar, but like the Academy, it's like enough is enough. Like you need to have either stunt coordinator or fight choreographer, or like you need to have this represented in film, because it's too huge of a part of cinema, and that like, that you're just like sort of undercutting. I don't know why they have this we're going to put in best like sound in animated short, which is like fine, but like they don't actually have that, but you know what I mean? Like you're going to have like, it's like, why can't you create and a couple of years ago they had this big like campaign. I think it was last year at the Oscars, where it was like, like to the stuntmen, and like they like had this big like rah for, it's like, fucking give them a goddamn Academy Award category. It's like so often, because I sort of lump in this, the fighting choreography amongst stunt choreography, but still it's really awesome. And it's kind of what makes this film, it puts it in another tier.
Yeah, and I feel like John Wick was a big part of that push a few years back to to give stunt people and choreographers their due, and they're so deserving, because I mean, the work that goes into it, the ability, the vision, the execution, there's so much there, and it contributes so deeply to a lot of these movies that we love. And that fight on the lake, where Broken Sword is in mourning, and he and Nameless, they don't want to fight each other, but they do it for honor's sake. They're walking on water. They're fighting with water. It's serene and it's dutiful. It's orderly and honorable. And eventually, Nameless just walks away, and there's this mutual respect. And we've talked a bit about getting to the truth. Each story getting closer to the truth. And there's also that kind of idea that comes up with the calligraphy and the character for sword that Broken Sword creates, and this idea of the ultimate wisdom.
It's funny that we mentioned the calligraphy and stuff, and I think it's like it's such a interesting part of the film where they relate fighting and combat with like music, and they fight and they can equate it with calligraphy, and they like, it's like this idea that fighting is an art form, and therefore like it gets equated to an art form, is pretty awesome, and so I think that's another interesting aspect of the film. That's like, it's something that's so, I don't want to say brutal, but like it's can be equated with violence, but it's actually something that's like very beautiful when it's presented in a certain light.
Well, certainly here it's presented in a beautiful way, and like the way this is done, it's almost like a fairy tale. The way they fly around, the way that they move and fight. This is sort of an age of heroes. You know what I mean? Like to draw on the title, where people were greater and they were faster and stronger, and they did these things that we could never hope to do. And it is kind of like almost a biblical parable in a way. And there is this continuing sort of rumination in the film on the pillars of civilization: calligraphy, music, philosophy, and
philosophy,
and also combat, and I think it's sort of, it lumps it in there in a way that it gives it reverence to say that it is an art form and things like that. I think it's also kind of telling you that it's a necessary aspect of civilization, that you cannot have these things without. And again, this goes back to the idea of it being Machiavellian and justifying conquest, because like, in order to get to the level where we have all of these wonders of civilization, we needed to kill a bunch of people, and you needed to be adept at wielding swords and arrows and martial arts and so on and so forth. And so there is this, again, it goes back to the beauty of the film and the underlying sort of message of the film, which could be considered at odds with beauty.
Which is so funny because, like, even in the film itself, when they're talking about the kind of like they're talking about the piece of calligraphy that was like so like it like changed the way, you know, the word that he creates, right? Like, and that's the our land, right? Correct. Like that's the one that hangs behind the emperor that comes in and they drop it.
No, that
No,
is the
that's
20th character for sword. That's the new he had
right,
broken sword
right.
make that so he could use it to decipher his sort of sword play style by seeing it through his calligraphy.
Yes.
Where our land comes up is he sort of etches it in the sand for him. But
Right. Yes. Right. Right. Right.
yeah,
But so
but the
my
emperor
point
does
being
see
though
the
that,
wisdom in yeah. Sorry, carry on.
but yeah, but it's these like these forms that are so conducive to like an individual, right? Like being a master of calligraphy or master, like even the blind you know, musician that they sort of like, you know, no, like you need to stop and play for us, and like philosophy and all these like art art artistic forms of expression that rely on sort of like one individual's like I don't know the word I'm thinking of, like the plateau, like their peak. They're like the, you know, they're getting to like, it's like, oh, the calligraphy is to the point of like, this guy is the master of this, right? And it's like an idea that the film is trying to get this idea that like you have to be, sort of have to fall in line and, you know, to, for the greater good of everybody. And, but like it relies so heavily on people that have mastered sort of these art forms, like fighting, like Nameless, right? Like, yeah, he's nameless, but he's also the master of his craft. And that's the
Mm-hmm.
only way that they can get across the message. Because if he can fall in line, then everybody can.
Yeah, and one thing the movie does really well is it doesn't sort of vilify the, I guess what there's that moment where the calligraphy school is under attack, and you see, you know, the
Yes.
master, he compels all the students to go back to their work, and though, yeah, we're under this rain of arrows and we're going to die, we'll show them the power of the written word and our spirit.
Right.
And you know, in a lot of ways the written word is the enemy of tyranny. You know, that is what has toppled more,
Right.
you know, more despots than
Right.
anything, you know, and it's just something that they fear. And so there's this like this idea in the movie. It doesn't fully vilify these things, but it also says that they need to die. You know what I mean? It's just like, yes,
Yeah.
like what these, this is noble, this is great, but it has to die because it cannot coexist with the world that we're trying to create. And that's such an interesting dichotomy in the film.
The last thing I want to touch on before we sort of get into if this is a hell of a picture, I just want to talk about like a little bit of the cinematography, and just like specifically just a couple shots that kind of stuck out to me.
Mm.
And I loved all the shots that kind of had Nameless like in and around the emperor's like palace, I guess, like when he's like sort of at the very beginning of the film when he's sort of walking up the steps and he's getting like 100 paces within, you know, it's like it's such a like a, you know, it's you've heard it in stories so many times, that idea. It's like, yo, and now this assassin got within 100 steps of me, and then he's like, you know, telling him, now you're within 10 steps of me, and you have the 10, you have the you know, the move that you can kill me in within 10 paces. So like, what is that? But those shots of sort of him, how he's positioned against the emperor while he's kind of in the palace, and it's like the, you know, the candles and how the candles are kind of like reacting. And there's just like, I just love how things are like, the things, everything was sort of framed. It's like during the fight scenes it was very like, you know, combatant here. It's like when the emperor, it's like they're very like framed. Everything seemed to be framed like so cleanly. And like
Mm.
my favorite shot in the whole film, which is probably everybody's favorite shot, you know, is when he's decide, they're like, you know, like he was an assassin, like you do, I can't remember how the wording is, but it's like you need to like, he's like, he kill the assassin, kill Nameless, and everybody's sort of chanting to the, and you sort of see the emperor at the very end, whether he's going to give like the go ahead to kill him. And he sort of stands, and that shot from low behind, looking up at the thousands of arrows just barreling down, and it's like such a cool shot. And it's like, you know, I know we've seen that shot a bunch. I'm like, I feel like it's definitely in like Lord of the Rings, I think. Not that because this came out the same time as that, but like just such a cool shot, right? Like,
yeah.
That was sort of a ramble, but I just wanted to get to the point where it's like, but like, just like the framing of things in shots, like where things are positioned, is just so technical and so clean, and it makes it feel like so, more impactful, I guess.
Yeah, there was a couple that stood out for me. At the end of the fight between Snow and Moon, where they're in that grove of trees and the leaves have been falling and they're all orange, and she's just killed Moon, and then the leaves change to blood red and the ground around her goes white, and there's just this incredible contrast. She's in red, the leaves are in red, the ground is white. It's just stunning. And then any of the great, there's sort of these great monochromatic shots in there too, like when I think it's at the start of the Blue story, and Nameless demonstrates for them the move where he cuts the bookshelf, and like they just sort of tumble down, and you're in this totally blue room. Everybody's in blue, and everything is blue, and just man, the use of color is just, oh my god, what a joy, what a treat to just look at. I could just watch this movie over and over again for the visuals.
That's what I mean. Like, and that's you know, to kind of come full circle. It's like sometimes, you know, the movie, the idea that you might not necessarily agree with the message, but you can see beauty in how the message is presented is, I think, an important idea with movies. It's like, and cinema in general, you might not always agree with what a filmmaker is attempting to say or attempting to get across, but sometimes it's quite stunning how it is. And, you know, that's, I think, what we have here. But let me get into the question that we finish all our episodes off with. And that is Hero a hell of a picture? Dave, what do you think?
So far in this series, we've talked about the idea of separating artist from art on at least two occasions, I guess, or certainly one specific person. I don't know if we've really had an instance where we've been forced to separate message from medium as we are here. And there is the adage, you know, the medium is the message, a phrase coined by the Canadian communication theorist Marshall McLuhan. And he proposed that the medium of communication, not the message it carries, should be the primary focus of study. And I think that's especially relevant here because the message we're confronted with is not one that I agree with at all. Certainly when one considers the source, the idea that could be framed as patriotism really seems more like justification for despotism. But the way the message is delivered, the medium, is one of singular beauty. This is one of the more striking films I think you'll ever see. The design, the fight choreography, the sound, it is galactic in its ambition and its execution. And I love this movie while also, you know, despising what it has to say. Hell of a picture for me, no doubt.
Whoa, hell of a picture. You know, you mentioned the design, the fight choreography, and the sound, and, you know, and I'll also throw in just the storytelling and like how you mentioned the execution. It's like how it's executed, how the story is told. It's a tricky way to tell a story, right? When you're retelling parts of stories, and you're retelling it from different perspectives, and you know, if you don't get it like right on, it can sometimes it can get confusing and convoluted and just not really work. Whereas here, I think it works perfectly. And I think, as you mentioned, like all these aspects, I think are so valuable to the film in general, with just stunning choreography and stunning sound, and just all these aspects that kind of come together to create this really, really impactful film that I feel is worthy of not just a rewatch, but worthy of kind of putting it up there with sort of films in this style, and just, you know, Asian cinema as well as like martial arts films. And, you know, I think you're right. It is a hell of a picture, and I'm pretty disappointed in myself that I didn't watch it before this week.
So, but now you get the joy of seeing it for the first time and experiencing it now. So it's it's never too late. Never too late to watch Hero.
And I will. It is a movie I will without a doubt go back and rewatch and be like, and you know, and to a degree, it's kind of re-sparked my interest in Crouching Tiger and House, like movies that I never saw. House of Flying Day, but I saw Crouching Tiger, but I haven't rewatched those movies in 20 years. I've just been like, oh yeah, I saw them. But House of Flying Daggers, I actually never saw, and so yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I'm gonna dive into some of these over the coming weeks and months. Awesome. Okay, so yeah, another hell of a picture. But you know, we talked a lot about propaganda, and we kind of hinted at what we were doing next week. Not even hinted. You straight up said, we're doing Rocky IV next week. And I didn't know the connection between Hero and Rocky IV. I mean, but I can sort of see it now. I can sort of understand the relation. So Rocky IV, man.
Rocky IV. Yeah, I mean, American exceptionalism, you know, in its most charming package, maybe. Been a while since I've seen that Rocky, and I'm looking forward to getting into it. You got Drago, you got, you know, you've got another great song by Survivor. You know, most people hold up "Eye of the Tiger" as the great motivational anthem. I think you and I know there were more than a few Burn CDs where "In the Burning Heart" was featured, and I might put that. I think I like that better than "Eye of the Tiger." So there's a lot to be said for Rocky IV, both in terms of all aspects of the film.
But yeah, I think it's another great example sort of the medium is the message, or it doesn't, like that sort of what you were talking about is like the medium versus the message. And like, there's a certain film that was created, and you know, whether we agree with it or not, we'll discuss, but also like, you know, it's an iconic film, and people, you know, and how it was presented, like you said, and using like the soundtrack, and people just will forever talk about the Rocky IV training montage. You know, the Rockies are notorious for the training montage, but specifically Rocky IV's training montage. I mean, it might be like the singular greatest training montage in any film. So it's worth discussing and worth getting into in our discussion of Hell of a Pictures.
Absolutely, for the training alone, we'll get into all of that, I'm sure, and maybe recreate a few moments for it. You know, who knows? I don't. Yeah, well, that's right. I'll go chop some wood if you want to. Work out with that like sort of carnival style punching bag that Drago had, where it measured the force of his punches. You know, we'll get into it. It'll be fun.
Yeah. You'll eat raw eggs and all, juice up on steroids. So we're good.
That's right. That's right.
Okay, cool. So Hero in the pillars of Hell of a Picture and Rocky IV next week. So for David Hollinshurst, my name is Andrew Bartlett, and this has been another edition of Hell of a Picture.